Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to the newest Grand Strategy Zombie Simulation game by Pock& Co. So, I'm making this guide because I recently won my first ever game as Japan, and I figured why not make a tutorial for how I won, and for new players. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, the first thing you have to keep in mind when starting a new game is which country you will play. Now, a country's population directly translates to how many workers and industry you're going to have. So, picking a country like Djibouti, which has only 1 million people, is going to be pretty hard. You're only going to have one worker to spare. Actually, I think the minimum is five, but still, not very good. You can employ up to 20 workers in one factory. So, having a factory with only 5 out of 20, even if you don't know much about the game, that's pretty bad, right? So picking a country that's a bit bigger is usually better. Maybe like Brazil, which has 200 million, which is very good. You'll have very good industry as Brazil. One thing to keep in mind, population does increase only through refugees. There's no passive population growth, but refugees are more likely to pick island countries. So if you play as Japan, for example, you start off with a good population and it's very easy to get more. In my Japan playthrough, I was able to get to 500 million very easily. So another thing to keep in mind when it comes to countries is how big they are. A country like Kazakhstan is very big, very rich, but very big. So you have to be very careful because you'll have a lot of cities to manage and it's very easy for you to lose by chaos. Right here. If you get to 100% chaos by losing cities or making too many refugees, etc., you will lose the game. If you get to 100%, you lose. So be very careful about playing a big country. Another important thing to know is that depending on how many cities you have, that directly determines how many storage you're going to have. So if you play a country like Moldova, which only has one city, you're going to have a max of 5,000 production. Now, 5,000 sounds like a lot, but a factory costs 15,000 and a science lab costs 20,000. So in order to increase your storage, you're going to have to go to war if you play a country with very few cities. So keep that in mind. Going to war is very lucrative for increasing your population and increasing how many factories you have, etc. But it also means you'll have less people to fight the zombies and bandits. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so let's begin as the United States so I can show you around and we can get started. As for what I think about this game, I think it's a very fun game. It's extremely fun in multiplayer. I've been really enjoying it. I have about 35 hours now. I'm really excited to see how the game develops. All right, so welcome to the deployment phase. Here you will place your army bases, your factories, and your power plants. So for army bases, that is where your army is originally stationed. You can station armies anywhere in any building, in factories and cities and power plants, refugee camps, anywhere. They can garrison anywhere. But they spawn in the army bases. So what I like to do is make this army bases between cities or next to cities that are very far away. Like here, maybe here, and we have two more. We'll put one between Atlanta and Dallas, and one between Phoenix and Los Angeles. We don't have any more cities up here, so. Armies are very slow in this game, so you have to be very careful about where you place your army bases. If you place them too far away, you're not going to be able to help your cities in time when bandits or zombies come knocking. For factories and power plants, there are two schools of thought. One is that you should place them all over in order to get fog of war lifted. Another one, which I subscribe to, is to place them near your army bases so that they're easy to defend from bandits or hordes. So we're just gonna go it my way of thinking because I'm the best. That there. Last up is your family. This is a unit that doesn't exist in multiplayer, only single player. Uh, they don't really do much. If you put them in another country, they give you information. Excuse me. They give you information about a country, and you can use them as spies. But for the most part, they're kind of slow. All right, let's go through the top bar, and I'll show you what each of the bars mean. But before we do that, let's advance one day. And you can see the numbers underneath the numbers indicate your resource gain slash your resource loss. And everything updates on a day by day basis. So armies move in real time, but for everything else, it's basically a turn based game. So keep that in mind. All the notifications and stuff come in daily in once a day updates. So for example, if you have an infestor, it basically looks like a giant spider, and it's what causes infection in cities. If you have one and it spawns right here, you won't be able to get the notification for it in time before it reaches Boston if the day just started. So you have to keep that in mind. You always want to be vigilant because you can't always trust notifications to save you. All right, without further ado, let's go through the icons. So first we have production. Let's build a builder so I can show you all the buildings. Where's New York? There we go. You can only build builders in cities and refugee camps. So as you can see, that costed us about 1,000. Yeah, exactly 1,000 production. Here we have high tech. High tech is what you use to make helicopters, tanks, and upgrade your factories and other resource production buildings. So there's no way to get more high tech except to invade other countries. So that's to simulate the fact that globalization has collapsed due to the zombie pandemic. So this is a very precious resource. Keep that in mind. Next, we have oil, coal, and uranium. These are all similar. They all produce electricity, which you need to keep your population happy. Now, oil has the added usage of letting your motorized units move around. So every time you move around a motorized unit, you will use up some oil. Not a lot, but enough to make a difference. So here we have our builder. I'll show what the buildings mean in a sec. Next, we have power. So an annoying thing about power is that you can't exactly see how much power you'll make at full capacity. For example, if I go to a power plant, you will see it'll tell me the max production of this power plant. If I were to make another power plant and increase it by another 1.29, it would only say, it wouldn't say 6 something, it would say 5.32. It would say what the required is. So in order to know what your max power is and whether you can support a larger population, you have to look at your individual power plants. This is a bit of an oversight development wise, but it's what it is. Let's see. Here we have population. Population, like I said, always goes down unless you get refugees or invade other countries. The best you'll get is a population gain of 0 without refugees. All right, next we have panic. Panic is caused by making refugees, mobilizing troops, etc. The higher your panic, the more bandits you're going to get, and the more population you're going to lose from riots or killings in the streets, etc. So you have to be very careful with your panic. It can rise pretty quickly, and it can wreck your country. You have to be very careful. Here we have mobilization level. So this goes up naturally over time. There's ways to increase it with policies, but for the most part, this is a very good stat, probably the most important stat of the game because it increases all of your resource gain and your production gain and your research gain. There's no way to really bring it down. You wouldn't ever want to bring it down. It just goes up naturally, and it just basically makes you stronger over time. There's very little you can do to, sorry, just got a notification. All right, so here we have workers. As you can see, we have no workers free right now. If I go to a factory and lower the amount of workers, you can see we now have 5 workers free. Add them back in, and we're back there. This is your scientist level. You use scientists for power plants and research labs, so you have to balance them out. You also use workers, not just for factories, but also for coal mines, uranium mines, and oil wells, as well as oil platforms. So keep that in mind. All right, so that's all of the top bar. Here we have an infestor. I can show you what that looks like finally. So as you can see, this infestor actually luckily spawned very far away from all of my cities. Infestors will head for cities and refugee camps. They will not infect harbors or any other type of buildings. They only focus on where the people are. And they won't infect your armies either, just your cities and refugee camps. So what you can do is create an army. I'll go more into detail about how to create an army eventually, but send them out, kill the infector. You don't lose any troops from that. That's not like a real battle. So don't worry. You don't have to worry too much about that. All right. So next up we have buildings. Let's go back to New York, select our builder. There's a few buildings. We have army bases. So not only are army bases where your army starts in the deployment phase, but they also allow you to build new troops through this menu. I'll go more into detail about it in a bit. So keep in mind that if you want more troops, you have to build more army bases. Or if you want more troops produced at the same time, is what I mean. Next, you have a factory and a power plant. Those produce industry and electricity, respectively. Research center produces research at a very, very low rate. So keep that in mind. You have to build a lot of research centers to really make a difference. Refugee camps, usually when you make a refugee or you bringing in refugees and you send them to a city, it increases panic by a lot, depending proportionally to how many people are in the refugee group. If you send them to a refugee camp instead, they won't generate any panic. The only bad thing about refugee camps is they have a maximum of 40 million people. So you have to build a lot of them. If for example, if China collapses or India and you have like 100 million uh, immigrants coming to your lands, you have to be very careful and build many refugee camps for them. So there's that. Oh, and in refugee camps, infestation also spreads very slowly, slower than in cities. So that's another thing to keep in mind. As you can see, New York's infestation is 0 right now. Every infestor that arrives in a city increases it by 1. And the higher it is, the more hordes you'll get, the more population you'll lose. And the more panic you'll get. Alright, so let's see. Let's build. Okay, so after that we have storage, which increases your storage, obviously. And then we have operation center, which allows you to create special units. So let's just create one right now and let it run for a bit. We'll come back to the operation center while it builds. For now, let's talk about armies. So, armies all start garrisoned in a place. In order to mobilize them, you hit create army, and there's 4 buttons here. This one increases it to the max. This one increases it to the minimum, or to nothing, that is. This one is the minimum button. You can create. Ooh, there it goes, Chicago. So you can only mobilize if you have at least 5,000 troops. If you have less than that, if I leave, for example, 400 behind, pretend these don't exist. If you leave 400 behind, you won't be able to bring that army out. So keep that in mind. If you leave too little garrison, you won't be able to fight back the infestors. And this one just increases it by half, splits the army in half, and this one, obviously, all of them. So let's just unleash them. As you can see, the bar at the top indicates how strong this army is, how big it is. We can move it around. As you can see, it moves in real time. And you can station them back in the city. Now, as you can see, that caused a bit of panic. It'll tell you how much panic you'll create. So if I move this much in, I'll get 1.5 panic. So you don't want to mobilize your troops all willy-nilly. One thing I like to do in order to stop infestors is to create a garrison of 5,000 and just leave them outside. That way I don't have to go through the trouble of mobilizing, especially in multiplayer when you can't really pause that often. You want to keep them armed and ready for infestors. All right, let's talk about boarding. So let's just say I send this army to the harbor. Let's pretend that this is that army. And let's say I want to ship the army to Long Island. So I take the army, I put them in there, and as you can see, there's 3 buttons here. You can either move them to the garrison, and they'll become part of the harbor garrison. You can board them, which makes them into a boat, and they'll be able to move around in the water. Or you can land them and mobilize them. But for now, let's just put them in there and board, and let's sail to Long Island. Let's see what happens. And as you can see, nothing happens because you can only send boats to other harbors. And there's no harbor nearby. Wow, okay. This is the closest harbor. So as you can see, you can only send them to other harbors. You can't send them to the land. So we'll just send them there. And that is how you board ships. Now, in order to make new armies, here's what you do. You go to troops production right here, the yellow button, and you select how many troops you want to make. For example, let's say I want to make 100,000. You can see this is how much it'll cost. 10,000 production, 100,000 people, manpower. And as you can see, our manpower is going down. Recruitment minus 500. So if we add tanks and helicopters, you can see that they now require both oil and high tech. And like I said, high tech cannot be replenished aside from war, so keep that in mind. And here you'll see that they produce 500 a day, 2 a day, 0.5 a day. You can increase how much they produce per day with technology and policies. We'll talk more about them in a bit. So we now have some infected cities, and let me show you how to deal with infestations. So the best way to deal with infestations is to prevent them in the first place. Make sure you eradicate all infestors that you see, even if they're far away from your cities, just so you don't forget about them, just for that peace of mind, get rid of them. So here we have 2 infestation on a 31 million population city. This is very bad. So what you can do is you can hit the evacuate button, and you can slide it until you get to 2 infestation removed. Every 6 chaos added, you get 1 infestation removed. So let's just mobilize this refugee. And as you can see, the refugee is gone. And refugees decrease their population over time due to attrition, so keep that in mind. And here we see we have no infestation left. Let's bring the refugee back in there. And as you can see, that's going to add 11 panic, which is a fair amount. And as countries collapse around the world, you'll get more and more panic. So you want to keep your panic low because it can stack up really quickly. Now, as you can see, we put the refugees back in and we're now at 0 infestation. An easier, more painless way of reducing infestation is to go to your operations center and build an ambulance, which reduces infestation by 1, 2, or 3, depending on your tech level. And there goes Chicago infected again. All right, so now that the operations center is built, let's go through the units. So we discussed ambulances. Infestors they let you infect other cities purposefully, which is kind of naughty. Don't do that. But they do allow you to weaken enemy neighbors. If, for example, you want to invade China, but they have too big of an army, you can send an infestor or an agent, which causes panic in their cities. So these two are both destabilizers. Technically, a hook can be that too. A hook, what it does is it lets you lead hordes around once hordes start spawning. Hordes are basically just roaming armies of zombies, so you can use hooks to lead them to other cities or other places so that they avoid your cities and installations. All right, so we're done with all that. Let's talk about technology now. So I'm going to go through each and every technology and uh, discuss whether or not you should get them and at what time. So first we have combat adaptations to zombies, increases damage to zombies. Very good tech. I usually get this like second or third tech once hordes are spawning. Increases unit sight radius. Pretty good. Not the most useful. I usually hold it off for a while, but it is good. Hook teams, they're pretty good. I don't usually get them very often. I usually just lead hordes around with normal soldiers, but hooks are pretty fast. And more increased damage to zombies very late game, very good though. Once zombies start getting in the like 10 million range, once hordes start getting up to 20 million, like you need this tech. Alright, so this one increases your militiamen and infantry daily max production. I usually avoid this one. I find that 500 a day and 5,000 a day is already enough, but it's if you find yourself where you need more troops, sure, why not? But there is a policy, and I'll talk more about policies later, but there is one that increases it by 100%. I usually just rely on that one if I need more troops. Reduces oil needs for troop movement, pretty obvious. More increase in production and more increase in production when it comes to military units. Here we have increases damages to bandits. You can get this if your panic is getting really high. If your panic is really high, the first priority should be this tech, reduces bandits generated by panic, followed by this tech. Here we have more unit sight radius and more bandit killing techs. Very good. If you click on a tech, you can see which tech is required in order to research it. For example, this one requires all 4 tier 4 techs. Here we have increases damages to humans. If I'm going to be invading a lot of countries, I focus on this one, either first or second tech. Increases tanks and helicopters, daily mass production. Increases damage to humans. I find that this technology kind of tapers off eventually after people start dying, countries start collapsing. You don't really need it past the first tech, I'd say. And last but not least, you have the global satellite. And this one's very expensive. It requires all of these techs, but it does remove the fog of war. I have yet to get it. Because I usually play smaller countries, I just use soldiers to lift the fog of war. But it's up to you if you want to get that tech. If you want to see like where refugees are and maybe snipe them, and then get them. So in the economy tab, we have factories. Factory production plus 25%. I usually get this as the first ever tech because even if you're a tiny country, squeezing out every last production is very important. This is another tech I get really early on, usually second or third, because it allows you to upgrade your factories. If you're playing as a smaller country and you don't have enough workers to go around, this increases the bang for your buck for your factories. Very important. This one I usually don't get until much later in the game. It's not as necessary. Unless you're really strapped for production, but it's just very expensive to get early on. Increases the number of workers by 10%. If I were to get this tech now, I would end up with 30 extra workers, which is pretty good. That's 1.5 factories that you can fill up. Increases oil, increases coal and uranium production, increases oil production, and increases power production. Pretty simple. If we go here, this is vaccine research, which is very expensive. It allows you to win the game if you complete it. You have to complete this tech too, and finally this tech. So 3 techs in total, and they're all very expensive. But they, like I said, they allow you to win the game. Next we have society. We have 3 techs here. Reduces chaos generated by defeats. If you find yourself at over 50% chaos, this is a very important tech. It'll keep you in the game longer. Reduced electricity usage. I usually only save this one for emergencies. If I have a lot of refugees suddenly and I don't have enough electricity to go around, that's when I'll use it. And finally, we have reduces bandits generated by panic. which is a pretty good tech. I usually get that very early on when I'm suffering from panic. This one allows the creation of agents, and then we have more bandit reduction. And last but not least, we have the science tab. We have increased infestation curing from ambulances, very good early on. Increase ambulance move speed, depends on how rich you are. If you can only afford one operation center for your whole country, you might want to get this. Increases research points by 15%, pretty good. Increase the number of scientists by 10%, pretty good. Reduces infestation speed. If you are absolutely just going down when it comes to infestation speed, you might want to get this one. This one allows you to get infestors. And this one's more infestation speed reduction. And finally, the vaccine. So that's all of the text. Hopefully I answered a lot of your questions with that. Finally, let's talk about policies. Policies are kind of an overlooked facet of the game when it comes to multiplayer. I find many people avoid them, but they're pretty good. So this one decreases your panic and mobilization level and increases your infestation daily. I usually get this one. It sounds bad, but as long as you keep your cities infestation free, it's pretty good. Keep in mind it does increase your chaos by a lot, so be careful. And I usually get this one too, the infestation campaign, or information campaign, which increases your mobilization daily by 7%, 0.07%, and increases panic by 0.2%. If you combine these, you'll notice you'll get a profit on both panic daily and mobilization daily. So the only bad malices to getting these two are the chaos and panic increases, but they're pretty good nonetheless. Electricity needs, I only get this one if I'm really rich, but I don't have enough power to go around. This one, general mobilization, is pretty good if you find a big horde near you and you just don't have enough troops to handle it, or if you're getting invaded and you need help. You can use this to increase the amount of troops you produce per day. Infestation daily, I don't usually get this one because I try to keep my cities infection free in the first place. But if you're suffering from that, you might want to get it. Research, trade off with production. You know, it's pretty obvious if you have more than enough production, you should get this one for research. This one I usually get, I usually enable because it allows me to squeeze out more production and it gives me, it's still, let's see. Oh, it's got infected. Again. There we go. We still end up with 0.36 panic per day, which is pretty good. Less panic per day. And finally, we have this one. This one's the more extreme version of this one. I usually avoid it because electricity needs on the daily is very, very... Plus 50% is very, very strong debuff. I would never get this unless I really need production. But if you're playing as a small country, sure, why not? You can enable this early on. It's pretty good. Alright, so let's talk about refugees real quick. Sometimes when countries collapse, they will produce refugees, and if you see them nearby, you could send soldiers near them to collect them, or send soldiers directly to them to battle them and, you know, do nasty things to them. Very bad. So the reason you want to do at least one of those two things to refugees that come in your country is that refugees start losing population over time, and that population either joins bandits, disappears, or joins the zombie hordes. So you have to be very careful about leaving refugees just lying in your territory. They can produce bad stuff for you. All right, and last but not least, let's talk about diplomacy. Diplomacy in this game is very bare bones. Very, very bare bones. The most you can do is attack other countries, declare war. And if you declare war on, for example, Mexico as the United States, there's a chance that neighboring countries like Guatemala or Honduras might join the war on the part of Mexico. So keep that in mind. There is a very loose form of aggressive expansion in this game. One thing you can do to improve relations and make sure that countries help you with ambulances and stuff is either going into their territory and killing hordes for them, or infestors, or sending ambulances to their cities. It'll say, "Oh, Italy thanks you for your help," and that improves your relations with them, and they'll be more likely to help you in the future. Now, what was I going to say? Give me one sec. No, it's gone. Yes, completely gone. Okay, well, I guess that'll do it for the video. Don't really know what else to mention. I think we mentioned just about everything. If you have any questions in the comments, let me know and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. As for whether I recommend this game, I would wholeheartedly recommend this game. It's very, very fun. And especially multiplayer, very fun. The developer is hard at work working on new updates. So the reviews on the game aren't very good right now. They're mixed reviews, but I, at the very least, recommend this game wholeheartedly. Alright, see you guys next time.